What would you do if saving a stranger's life meant losing your own? That was the question facing Sarah Mallister on the coldest morning she'd seen since her husband died. The winter wind swept hard across the Montana Territory in 1885. Snow came down in heavy sheets, stinging Sarah's cheeks as she hurried from the barn with a bucket of milk. Life on the ranch had been hard since Thomas passed 5 years ago, but she carried on because this land was the only piece of him she had left. Every fence post, every trail through the pines, every plank in the cabin still felt like his hands were on it. She walked toward the house, Thomas's wedding ring hanging on the chain around her neck. The weight of it was familiar, almost comforting, even in the biting cold. The sky glowed a pale gray as dawn pushed its way forward. Inside the barn, her cow Bessie had grumbled softly as she milked her, and for a moment she had felt the peace that came from routine. But peace never lasted long these days. Trouble had been circling her ranch for months. Carlton Rhodes, the richest landowner in 3 counties, had sent 3 offers to buy her land before the first snowfall. All refused. Rhodes believed a woman had no place running a ranch alone, and he made that opinion known every chance he got. But Sarah Mallister didn't bow to bullies. Thomas taught her better than that. By midday the storm grew darker, rolling in from the north like a giant wall of gray and white. The wind howled across the valley. Snow gathered so fast that the path between the barn and the cabin nearly vanished. Sarah spent the late afternoon hammering shutters closed and checking her food stores. No neighbor would be able to reach her for days once the storm settled in. She had just set the kettle on the stove when she heard something strange. Something the storm itself didn't make. A heavy thump, followed by a low groan. Sarah froze. The sound came from her porch. Her fingers went straight to the rifle above the fireplace. She lifted it carefully, stepped to the door, and cracked it open. A man lay collapsed in the snow. For a moment she just stared, stunned by the sight. Snow covered his hair and shoulders. His coat, fine wool, the kind only very wealthy men wore, was soaked through and streaked with blood. A bullet hole darkened the fabric near his shoulder. His lips were blue, his breath faint and shaking. "Sir?" Sarah called out over the wind. "Can you hear me?" The man stirred weakly. Something fell from his hand and hit the porch with a soft clink. Sarah knelt, keeping one hand on her rifle, and picked it up. It was a brass compass. Handsome, heavy, with fine engraving across the front. The name on it sent a shock through her chest. J. Blackwood. James Blackwood, the railroad baron's son. The wealthiest young man in 3 territories. The man rumored to be buying ranches and banks everywhere he went. "What in God's name happened to you?" she whispered. He was freezing to death. She could see it clearly now. His skin nearly white, his fingers stiff, blood frozen at the edge of the wound. If she left him outside, he would die within the hour. If she brought him inside, she would break one of the oldest, strictest frontier laws. No unmarried woman may shelter an unrelated man overnight under her roof. If discovered, she would face one of 2 punishments: forced marriage or exile. Sarah looked out into the violent storm. No one else would find him. No help was coming. And she was no murderer. Not by action. Not by neglect. "I must be out of my mind," she muttered, lowering the rifle. It took everything she had to drag him across the porch and into her cabin, his boots leaving long grooves in the snow. She pulled him toward the fire, removed his frozen coat, and cut his shirt open. The bullet wound was deep but clean. He had lost a dangerous amount of blood. His skin was ice cold. She heated a kettle, poured whiskey over the wound, cleaned it the way Thomas had taught her, and began stitching with shaking fingers. James Blackwood didn't wake once. Hours passed. The storm howled like a living thing around the cabin. Flames cracked in the fireplace. Sarah worked until sweat dampened her brow despite the cold. When she finally finished and sat back, her hands trembling, she noticed the leather book that had fallen from his coat. A ledger. Its pages were filled with names she knew: Rhodes, Miller, Turner, and numbers that made her stomach twist. Debt, foreclosures, unpaid interest at impossible rates. Half the valley. All owing money to James Blackwood. Sarah closed the book quickly, her heart pounding. She had saved the life of the man trying to buy out her neighbors, the man trying to take her land. She stared at him, still pale, still breathing shallowly, wrapped in blankets on her floor. "What am I supposed to do with you?" she whispered. The storm raged on. Snow piled against the windows. No footsteps could reach her cabin now. Come morning, the entire valley would know she'd had a man under her roof. And not just any man. James Blackwood. Her life would never be the same. Sarah barely slept. Every time the wind screamed across the roof, she jolted awake, afraid someone might be riding through the storm, ready to accuse her of harboring a man. By dawn, the blizzard had calmed, leaving the world outside buried in thick white snow. Inside the cabin, James Blackwood lay pale but breathing, his fever rising and falling like the tide. Sarah knelt beside him and pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. His eyes fluttered open for the first time. "Where am I?" His voice was hoarse and weak. "Safe," Sarah said, though the word felt like a lie. "You collapsed on my porch. You were shot, and the storm almost killed you." He tried to sit up, but pain twisted his face. "My compass." Sarah pulled it from her pocket and handed it to him. He clutched it like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "You saved my life," he whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she poured him a cup of water and held it to his lips. When he finished drinking, his gaze sharpened just enough for recognition. "You're Sarah Mallister, the widow." She stiffened. "Seems you know me. Everyone knows the ranch you won't sell. And everyone knows the man buying everything else," she replied. His jaw clenched. For a moment he looked like he wanted to argue, but another wave of pain struck him. "Don't talk," she said. "You need rest." He closed his eyes again, but not before whispering, "You shouldn't have helped me." Sarah didn't answer. Deep down, she knew he wasn't wrong. By midday, the storm clouds were thinning, revealing a world bright with fresh snow. Sarah baked a loaf of bread, trying to calm the nerves tightening in her stomach. Once the roads cleared, someone would come checking on her. That's how things worked in the valley. Neighbors looked after neighbors. And neighbors talked. Shortly after noon, she heard the crunch of hooves in the snow. Her blood ran cold. She rushed to cover James with a quilt, hiding the bandages, the blood-stained cloths, and anything that looked suspicious. His feverish breath filled the silence as she moved quickly. The knock on the door came loud and firm. "Mrs. Mallister?" Ben Turner's young voice rang through the wood. Sarah steadied herself and opened the door just enough to see him, and his father beside him. Old Turner's eyes were sharp, too sharp. "We came to check on you after the storm," he said. "Saw fresh tracks before it hit, not yours." Her heart thudded painfully. "I had to secure the shutters last night," she lied. Ben tilted his head. "Those prints look like heavier boots than yours." Before Sarah could form a reply, a weak cough came from inside the cabin. Old Turner's eyes narrowed. "Who's in your house?" "No one," Sarah tried. Another cough, louder this time. Ben exchanged a look with his father. Old Turner stepped forward. "Mrs. Mallister is the appointed town registrar. I must remind you of the law." Sarah swallowed hard. "Please." "It's simple," he continued. "An unmarried woman can't harbor a man overnight unless she marries him or leaves the territory." Sarah's fingers shook on the doorknob. "Let us inside," Old Turner said gently. "We need to see." The fight drained out of her. She stepped aside. Both men walked in and froze when they saw James Blackwood lying near her fireplace. Ben whispered, "Good Lord, that's him." Old Turner sighed heavily. "This is bad, Sarah, very bad." "He would have died," she said softly. "What was I supposed to do?" Old Turner removed his hat. "You did what any decent woman would have done. But the law doesn't care about decency." James shifted, eyes opening just a bit. His voice was rough but clear enough. "I didn't ask her for help." Old Turner knelt beside him. Doesn't matter. The law applies the moment you crossed her threshold. James looked at Sarah, something like guilt flickering in his eyes. I'm sorry. Sarah held her arms tight against her chest. What happens now? Old Turner opened the town registry book with a tired sigh. If he survives, you'll need to make a decision. What decision? Sarah whispered, though she already knew. Marriage, he said. Or exile. Ben looked horrified. Pa, she can't just. It's the law, son. A heavy silence fell between them. James tried to speak, but pain forced him back down. His voice was barely audible. You shouldn't pay for saving me. Old Turner closed the registry. I'll give you 2 days. After that, the council will have to act. They left quietly, leaving the cabin filled with a thick, choking silence. Sarah sank into her rocking chair, staring at James's still form. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. She did what was right. And now she might lose everything because of it. Hours passed before James regained enough strength to whisper, Why did you help me? Sarah stared at Thomas's ring hanging at her collarbone. Because my husband believed every life deserves a chance, even yours. James watched her carefully. The law, it doesn't have to ruin you. What choice do I have? Her voice cracked. We find another way, he murmured. There is no other way, Sarah replied. There's only marriage or exile. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. A truth neither wanted to say aloud. The room felt too quiet. The air, too, still. Snow tapped gently against the window like it carried the whole valley's whispers with it. Sarah turned away before he could read her expression. For the first time since Thomas died, she didn't know what tomorrow would bring. 2 days later, the storm had cleared, but the tension inside Sarah's cabin only grew heavier. The sun shone bright on the valley, casting long shadows over the snow-covered fields. It should have been a peaceful morning, but nothing felt peaceful anymore. James Blackwood was stronger now. He could sit up on his own, though every movement still came with a wince. Sarah had fed him broth, changed his bandages, and kept the fire going through long nights. She told herself she did it because it was the right thing to do. But every time she caught him watching her quietly, something warm tightened in her chest, something she wasn't ready to acknowledge. The truth was simple. Saving his life had changed hers, and now the law was coming for both of them. Near noon, hooves crunched outside the cabin again. This time, it wasn't just Ben and his father. Sarah peeked through the curtain and felt her heart sink. It was half the town council. Old Turner, Peters, Reverend Scott. Even Mrs. Lane, who never missed a chance to gossip. James had pushed himself into a sitting position, his face pale. They're here for the ruling, aren't they? Sarah could only nod. A knock sounded. Firm, final. She opened the door slowly. Mrs. Mallister, Peters said, clearing his throat, we need to discuss the matter of Mr. Blackwood. The council filed inside, eyes snapping straight to James. Mrs. Lane gasped and whispered, Oh my. Old Turner didn't waste time. He opened the registry book, the leather creaking like a warning. Sarah, you've harbored a man for 3 nights. The law is clear. James pushed himself to stand, gripping the table for support. If someone must be punished, punish me, not her. That's not how the law works, Peters said. Sarah felt something rise inside her. Anger, fear, maybe both. What would you have had me do? She demanded. Close the door in a dying man's face? Let him freeze on my porch? The Reverend sighed. No one doubts your heart, Sarah, but the law was made for a reason. To protect reputations. To maintain order. Quote, And what happens now? She whispered, voice trembling. Old Turner looked at her gently. You decide, marriage or exile. James stepped forward, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. Then, marry me. Sarah's breath caught. The room fell silent. Mrs. Lane nearly dropped her gloves. Mr. Blackwood, Peter stammered, this is a serious legal commitment, not something to be suggested out of gratitude. It's not gratitude, James said, meeting Sarah's eyes. It's practical. It keeps her home. It clears the law, and... He hesitated. "And it gives us a way to fix what's happening in this valley." Sarah's heart pounded. She understood what he meant. His ledger, the debts. The ranchers being pushed off their land. If he stayed, if he married her, maybe she could save her home and her neighbors. But marriage? To a stranger? To the man whose business had been draining the valley dry? Her fingers trembled around Thomas's ring. The past. The love she had lost. And now, this impossible future. Reverend Scott stepped forward. "Sarah, child, what is your answer?" The room spun. She looked at James. His gray eyes held hers, steady and sure, stronger than she had ever seen them. He whispered so only she could hear. "I won't let you lose what you've built. Let me help you. Let me stand with you." Sarah's throat tightened. She wasn't ready, she wasn't sure, but the alternative. Leaving her land, her memories, her life. It wasn't an option. She took a shaky breath, straightened her shoulders, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "I will marry him." Gasps filled the room. Mrs. Lane nearly fainted into her shawl. Reverend Scott nodded solemnly. "Then it shall be done. Sunday morning, after service." James exhaled slowly in relief, but Sarah felt her knees weaken. The council left in a rush of excited whispers and hurried footsteps, eager to spread the news across the valley. When the door closed, the cabin fell silent, except for the crackling fire. James stood still for a long moment before saying softly, "Sarah, you won't regret this." She looked at him with tired eyes. "You can't promise that." "No," he admitted, "but I can promise I'll try." Quote. There was something honest in his voice, something that shook her more than the storm ever had. Days passed in a blur. The valley buzzed with the news. Every rider passing by slowed down to stare. Every neighbor left a pie or loaf of bread with "best wishes" written in shaky handwriting. By Sunday, the church was packed. Sarah stood in a simple blue dress, Thomas's ring hanging around her neck one last time. She touched it gently. Then she removed the chain. Thomas had taught her how to survive. James was giving her a chance to rebuild. She placed the ring gently into a small wooden box. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." James stood at the front of the church, cleaned up, steady despite the healing wound. When he saw her walk in, something softened in his face. Something she didn't know how to name. The ceremony was simple. One vow, one prayer, one promise, neither fully understood, but both needed. By the time the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the valley outside the windows shone bright under the morning sun, as if the world itself had been washed clean. Afterward, as the crowd spilled outside in a flurry of congratulations, James leaned close to her ear and whispered, "Sarah, this marriage may have begun as duty, but I want to build something real with you, something honest, something good." She swallowed hard. "I don't know how to start over." "That's all right," he said, taking her hand. "We'll start together." For the first time since Thomas died, Sarah let someone walk beside her as she stepped into the unknown. Her future was no longer a lonely road. It was a shared path, uncertain, complicated, but full of possibility. And she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope.